Welcome to Cybersecurity District, the podcast where we interview the most inspiring minds in the cybersecurity industry. Get ready to meet our next guest in the district. Today, we're speaking with Tom Leijte, the founder of one of the most exciting and emerging cybersecurity companies in the Netherlands, called Passguard. Passguard has a clear mission: alert organizations the moment infected devices and sessions appear on criminal marketplaces, which we usually call the dark web. With infostealers exploding in volume and stolen sessions being traded at scale, Passguard gives companies something they've historically lacked: early visibility into exposure before it becomes a breach. Under Tom's leadership, the company has recently raised a significant investment round from some of the most respected Dutch cybersecurity investors and CISOs. So this is really a strong validation both of the problem that they're solving and the way that they're trying to solve this problem. So today, Tom, we'll explore your journey, your technology, the market, and what's coming next. So a big welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I was looking forward all week for this episode. Because I think the dark web is something we all hear about, whether you work in cyber or not. But I feel, also for me personally, I don't really understand this whole ecosystem. Before we had a quick chat, but you said you did not start much in cybersecurity yourself. You were into private investigations. And there you got your first encounter with the dark web. I think it's a fascinating story. Can you elaborate?
My background is basically that I worked in a private investigation company for 7 years. And that company was built out of intelligence experts. So basically people who worked for the Dutch intelligence services, and the work that they did for the Dutch government, we were now doing as a company for some of the larger Dutch organizations on the more sensitive topics. For example, critical infrastructure, especially when it comes to security on the North Sea. The assets they held there. But also, and that was a lot of the work that I actually spent, was on investigations and specifically employment screenings, pre-employment screenings for the more sensitive roles that these organizations have.
What type of roles can I think, like C-level? Or?
So that includes both C-level roles, but also, and primarily I would say, roles, IT roles in which people have a lot of agency to act on their own, right? So they can be quite autonomous there. And that also gives these positions a higher risk profile in itself. And for these screenings, we would use as much open sources as we could reasonably get our hands on. And one of these sources, and that was via my co-founder, Sanno, was dark web data. Why did we think that was relevant? If we can get hold of that data and use it against you, basically, then intelligence service from abroad can get that data as well and use that in the same way. And if you don't know about your own leak data, or if it in itself may be quite a risk for the organization that you're applying for, that it's out there, for example, that you had some kind of a cyber criminal past, then that's good to know. And that's relevant for us to include in the screening. So Sanno has a background. He luckily is the cyber expert. So I don't have to do this all on my own. He's very important in the Passguard story. And he has built up that infiltration in the criminal marketplaces. And basically that started with that background in private intelligence.
Were you surprised at some point when you really went deeper into dark web and dark web monitoring? What shit you you got to see? Or
yes, and you ask it in the past tense, but it's still a continuous process. So we continue to be amazed by how much is out there and how unknown that information is. Each time first of all, it was just the regular leak data and how much leak data there is about people. I should clarify how that data gets on the dark web. Basically, it's people registering for third-party services like Dropbox, LinkedIn. It's the standard dark web data that cyber experts listening to this podcast would classify as such. And these third-party services, they have a breach, and then sooner or later that data ends up on the dark web. That's the traditional dark web data. But that was our first amazement, basically. Second category that you have basically is data brokers collecting information about people, most often without their permission. And if something is worth money, then criminals go after it. So criminals also breach those organizations, and those data profiles get leaked out there as well. So famous leaks for that category are Apollo, People Data Labs. But later on, and that was our next big amazement, is when we found out about these infostealer infections. And at the time we found it out, we didn't even know the name for it, basically. So for us, it was just, we saw it were hacked devices, but what actually it wasn't all too clear to us. The industry term back at the time wasn't as clearly known as it is right now. But we saw, hey, wait, this is actually a device that has malware on it, and the actual sessions on the device are being offered for sale. And that is a massive shift of perspective for the dark web, because most organizations, before in the past, they might care about leaked passwords from a third-party service because there was a lot of password reuse and there wasn't, most importantly, multi-factor authentication. But now there is. The thing is with these infostealers is that the perspective is changing back. The dark web is basically relevant again because of these infostealers. Why? Because the infostealer malware actually steals session tokens. And with these session tokens, you can actually bypass multi-factor authentication. And this is so relevant because these devices that get hacked, they have access to internal systems. Imagine, for example, that you have an employee who works on a private device and using that private device logs into regular internal Microsoft environments, for example. But if that private device is infected with an infostealer, you will never get an alert about it, right? So you have your endpoints protected. Basically, this is an unprotected endpoint for you. It's unmanaged. You don't see it. You won't get a notification. Then the infostealer steals the session tokens and the attackers can get inside. And that was our next big amazement. First of all, that it's all out there. How much detail is in those logs? So basically, you're looking at a partially censored forensic copy of a device. That's how detailed the information is. But secondly, also, what a blind spot it was. Because I already told you, I don't have a background in the cybersecurity industry. So for us, it's just exploring to what extent is the thing we do relevant. And that was our next big amazement, right? With the traditional dark web monitoring, most people have heard about it once, have heard about it, maybe know some of the dark web exposure, and they didn't care all too much usually. But with that second part, that was a massive blind spot, but also a massive gap in their security organization. So I would say that's still an ongoing thing that we have sometimes that we think, well, basically, okay, this is a really unique thing that we're doing and how we can help organizations.
So infostealers are basically devices that get compromised.
So an infostealer, just like ransomware, is a type of malware.
Yeah,
and it does what it's in the name. It steals information. So, for example, on the laptop which you're carrying right now, if an infostealer would be active on that laptop, then the criminals will basically have the same access from that device as you would have as a user. And that's the first thing to know about them. They are quite familiar to the remote access tools. So another type of malware. And it's also interesting to keep in mind because there you are not just speaking about stolen information, but also remote access over a device. And that's something really most people don't realize.
This is like the new way of the modern way of hacking in a sense.
Yes, and the market is really working in the infostealers' benefit. Why is we see a lot of companies moving away from VDIs, for example, like Citrix, because they want to be flexible. We see a lot of companies, especially with the pandemic, not all too long ago, moving towards bring your own device in a sense. So more unmanaged endpoints popping up. And of course, a lot of SaaS applications popping up, which you don't manage as strongly. So basically it counts up to people can work from anywhere, have access to any system. And that's great for infostealers because basically it increases the chance that they hit jackpot and have actually something valuable to sell on the marketplaces.
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. Also super scary, yeah, because with an EDR and just do your regular endpoint protection, I think you can do a lot. But if people indeed bring their own devices and you have SaaS and it's more remote, this is a war you're not gonna win.
Yeah, and the thing is here as well that it's not a technical problem per se. It's basically a organizational problem because, of course, you have EDR, and what we see, and I think this is the good news that I want to share. It's not just bad news. The good news is that EDRs are actually very capable at catching infostealer infections on those managed devices before they succeed in stealing information. So it's very, very rare for data from protected managed devices to pop up in those infostealer marketplace. That's the good news for all the security experts listening to this podcast. I would say the bad news is that most of the security professionals don't really know which other unmanaged endpoints have access to their internal systems. And it can be those private devices that I just spoke about, but also consider suppliers. This is another category that we see popping up more often than most people are comfortable with, is that, yeah, of course you can manage and protect your own endpoints, but most of the time you rely on suppliers. They're not all big companies. So these might be small companies as well, and not as professional as yours. And they might have either a private device or a not so well protected managed device. And there an infostealer infection might cause its damage with direct access to your systems as well. Third category, what we're seeing is basically for multinationals, this is especially relevant, is devices abroad. Because this is policy-wise, right? And it's much easier to enforce your bring your own device policy at HQ than it is at some distant location abroad. And what we see here, and this is a use case we've seen more often with our clients, is that somewhere just people decide to buy a laptop because it's such a hassle to do that via the regular company procedure, and then use it as a company laptop. And basically, because that's an unprotected laptop, at some time it gets infected with an infostealer, and then, you have this problem facing you.
So you did the discovery on the dark web together with your co-founder, and from there on you come up with the idea. Okay, this is shocking. So we're onto something new. We basically see infostealers as a new big thing, and where does Passguard then come in the picture, and what's exactly the problem and also the solution that you're offering nowadays?
So Passguard was already in the picture before we found out about infostealers, because we were not burdened by all that much knowledge about the cybersecurity market. So we just started. And then gradually we didn't get all too much traction on our standard dark web monitoring proposition, so to say.
Why was that? Because the big players, the American companies, the Israeli companies?
No, I don't think it was more, it was so focused on competition-wise. I think the main problem there is that if there's one thing to tell about people working in IT, about CISOs, is that they're extremely busy and they have 3 top priorities or 10 top priorities, and then covering about leaked data from third-party databases. Well, it can be relevant, but it's not all. It's not going to bite you probably. So they have more important stuff to do. And for us, it really was a turning point. I just read the Mom Test. I don't know whether you know about this particular book. I'm really fond of it because it's a book that you can read in 3 hours. I like reading, so that's not that I hate that. But the thing is that it's really practical, and the theme behind the book is. Not that you should... I should have explained this in a proper way. Just reverting back a bit. So a turning point for us was we didn't get that real traction that we wanted to. And then I stumbled upon that book, The Mom Test. And the idea behind that book is that your mom will always give you bad advice. For example, if you pitch your business proposition and then your mom will say, "Great idea, honey. Just get to work," and that's not a great idea. But the thing is, what the author of the Mom Test is saying is not that your mom is wrong per se, but is that way of asking questions is wrong, and that anybody will lie to you, and they won't lie to you because they're mean, but they are not honest to themselves, and they're not honest to themselves about the future specifically, and they're friendly. Yeah. So basically meaning, of course, it's cheap for me to say that you have a great idea, right? And the second thing is that people are not honest about the future. They will say that they will next week or next year, New Year's resolution, for sure they will go to the gym 3 times a week. And for sure I will buy your solution when it's out there. Just go ahead, push ahead. And it basically taught me how to do good customer conversations. And I really remember this one conversation in September 2023. And there's one, this conversation lasted for hours and hours. And my energy basically dropped to an all-time low at the end of that conversation. And specifically, there's one advice in the MOM test. If you don't ask one question that has the potential to ruin your business model, your business proposition, then it's not a valuable conversation. And at this particular conversation, one of the few I was having at the time, I did ask that question, does it really matter basically, or that's what it resulted in? And then he said, I couldn't care less, right? And I was like, oh my, we have to do something differently. At the time, we first time found out about Infostealers. And just 2 months later, we used that in practice. And we had this conversation with the team. What are we doing that actually solves a problem? Because dark web monitoring, that's something I do, but it's not a problem my clients have.
Yeah.
And the way I pitched it, looking back at it, it's always obvious, right? The way I pitched it, you could solve 8 problems with it. 8 problems, not all too important. And that's why, and that's what we decided back then, to boil it down to just one. Just that problem of Infostealers. That's a problem that my clients have, that organizations have, that they should solve because it's really important, right? And that's why we push forward on that one. Basically push 2/3 of our proposition to the side, just focusing on Infostealers, making sure people learn about it because there's really not that much awareness about it. Not as much as it should be. And also then, of course, trying to sell the solution. And that for a period of time that really worked.
Yeah, super interesting. Also, I love the book you mentioned, and also it relates in a painful way. I've also as an entrepreneur, I've tried a lot, and then the way you ask your questions to get validation is so biased already. So you leave the other party almost always saying, yeah, that's good, that's a great idea, and then you say, would you also pay for it? Yeah, probably, yeah. And then you go in a certain direction. But it's not the true, real feedback that you're looking to get out of those conversations.
Yeah, I fully agree. For me, it was the most important book I've read, basically in the startup founder journey, because it basically enforces you to meet, if you actually, of course, act upon the book, but to learn those inconvenient truths that are out there about your ideas. And what I think is really great is that it teaches you. To ask different questions that relate to the how. So basically, first of all, what are your main problems as a possible buyer? Not pitching your solution in any way yet. And secondly, asking, how do you solve those problems right now? Because as a startup founder, you don't really know what you're competing against, because it's not those competitors that already have a solution, but it's also you're probably competing against Excel spreadsheets and not doing anything at all. So that really was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Great news. That particular guy I spoke with just signed up as a client 1 week ago. So I'm really happy with that. So I think that proves that we did some great work there.
So he was truly honest. So
he was truly honest. Painfully honest. Yeah.
But that's what you seek. Yeah, super interesting. What I also find marvelous is how the dark web works, but also how you and your team have sort of infiltrated the dark web. So also for the non-technical listeners or people that are not even in cybersecurity, how does this dark web work? And how would companies like yourself or threat intelligence organizations, how do they penetrate this dark web? And even for me as a noob, say in the technical bits and bytes, how would I be able to infiltrate?
So first of all, it's important to get a grasp of how this works. So there's not one dark web, right? So the dark web, I use the broad term, basically. For us, it just refers to criminal marketplaces. And these criminal marketplaces, for example, increasingly are also on Telegram. So it's not just Tor, the Onion router, that particular browser that you can use to access particular dark web websites. That's the traditional way of dark web, which is still very much alive to this day as well. And what's important to know is that no one in these criminal marketplaces trusts each other. So
'Cause everybody's a crook.
basically, yes. And then how do you establish some kind of commercial relationship? Because you are an entrepreneur, you know how important trust is in doing business. So that's really something that they have to work around. Basically, what's the most important way how they do that is they have pseudonymity. So these are anonymous pseudonyms, and they build reputations. And reputations you build up by participating in the criminal ecosystem, building up your reputation, for example, by buying, selling stuff, criminal data in this instance, by participating in the conversation out there. And it's these anonymous profiles, these pseudonyms that have these reputations that makes doing business possible in combination with escrow services. So that's basically wardens for the transaction until it's been delivered to satisfaction. So that's basically the combination with crypto as well, of course, which makes this ecosystem work. So these I think are some of the fundamentals. And when it comes to how we do it, basically we're a small company, right? So I can't afford to have our team working on infiltrating new dark web sources most of the time. So we had to do that in a different way. Luckily, we had some years counting already, and that's working our advantage right now because of the stuff in the private intelligence agency I just spoke about. And what we have built, what Sanne has built, first of all, is basically an army of bots. And that army of bots is active around the world, each in their own time zone. And they're all programmed for normal human irregularities, right? So they don't start at 9 and stop at 5, right? That would be strange. Yeah. But they're all programmed to have these different time zone profiles and to be unpredictable in that sense. And these bots, they have gathered low-level reputation points throughout these forums for years and years. And what we have done is we have transmitted these reputation points to some of the kingpins in our network, which aren't interconnected, of course, because that would make our infiltration vulnerable. But they have transmitted these points to the kingpins in the network, and they have succeeded into infiltrating into the most secure marketplaces. And the most secure marketplaces are relevant because that's where you get into the real action, where as I said, these copies of forensic logs are being offered for sale more out in the open because that's just where the trusted partners meet. So I sometimes compare it with when you're in a really bad neighborhood in some back alley and there's some dubious pub out there, and in that dubious pub some dealing gets done, but in behind that pub you have a curtain, and only the real guys, they can walk through that curtain and get to see, get to participate in the real action where the bosses meet, basically. And our profiles, they are there, and they're just writing down what's being traded there, so we can notify our clients when something new pops up.
Super nice. Super nice. It's really also the way you describe it. It feels like a movie indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. So and the thing is always hard to visualize it, right? Because it's just online activity, right? So if you watch it, it isn't all too amazing. But if you realize what's actually happening, I agree, it's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is less sexy and cool than the regular.
Yeah, if you view it, right?
That
is just data and internet forums. But if you realize what's actually happening there, because it's real criminals trading in real sensitive access out there, right? So a real world comparison basically is crazy when you think about it. Also because numerous types of criminals are in there in those marketplaces. For example, in May this year, a report was published by the Dutch intelligence services AIVD and MFA. And it was about the data breach at the Dutch police. And at this particular data breach, the contact details of all 60,000 Dutch policemen and women were stolen. And when the news broke about this particular breach, we thought, well, this seems very Infostealer related, but then the government brought out that news, right? It was a state actor. So, okay, well, who are we to blame, right? We don't know anything about it, so we can't opinionate about it. But then later on, this publication was brought out. How did this actual breach started? It was basically Infostealer malware, you might have guessed, on a device that had access to the internal environments, and then the state actor, it bought it from a criminal marketplace.
Yeah.
And this is something to realize because, of course, why would a state actor go for the hard way in when there's an easy way in and they can just buy their access? I think this is also what explains the magnitude of what's happening there, because it's also part of this bigger play between geopolitical actors.
And this example you give, this is sort of a hot lead, probably. Somebody has an Infostealer at potentially the Dutch police. From your opinion, how much would that be worth on a dark web, on a criminal marketplace? How would that be traded?
So what you see is that there are quite broad price differences. So for example, sometimes actors know that they have quite a lot of, well, I wouldn't call it garbage, but not so spicy access.
Fruit kind of stuff. Yeah.
And then they combine it into one offer, add one with company access, and then make sure that batch gets sold basically. And you could see that being sold for $10 or so. So the prices aren't that hefty. But if they identify that they have actual real access to something that to an organization most of the time, and then valuable access to that organization, because that's also something to take into account, then the price might surge to 1K or 10K. Usually some haggling gets done, some dealing gets done afterward. That's not something that we see, right? We just see the offering being done, not what's being done after the sale. So it's hard to gauge what the real transaction value is. But I think that's really, as a buyer, as a criminal, you really get value for money in that sense. What's interesting for listeners to know, I before spoke about that comparison between remote access tools and Infostealers. And it's really important for people to break away from the thing that Infostealers, they just have passwords, right? I also already spoke about the session tokens, but they have more. Because what we also see popping up in those marketplaces is that they prove the real access they have to systems, to laptops, to desktops with screenshots. And these screenshots are taken automatically by the malware. But it shows, right, I have real access to the system. How could I otherwise make this screenshot? But I think this is, for listeners, this makes clear that it's so much more than just a stolen password and even more than a stolen session token. Because when an Infostealer is persistent, they continue to steal these sessions, right? Because sessions expire, sometimes after 24 hours, more often than what's good in days, weeks, sometimes even months when we're talking about super cookies. But the thing is that if an Infostealer is active, each time you start a new session, that session gets stolen by the Infostealer as well. And that creates new valuable access to your systems.
Yeah, so it's always up to date. Basically, when
if Infostealer is persistent, then it's up to date.
Yeah, and that makes it very scary. Yeah, I get it now. Yeah, but I really needed your clarification. And props how you explain it.
Thank you.
Super interesting. What I wonder as a follow-up question is how do you serve now your customers? Because you're a new player in the scene. So how would you go about in the first years to first of all educate your clients or prospects that this is a potential issue they have not discovered yet themselves? And then secondly, how would you make a service around it that they will become a buying customer?
So first of all, what we try to do, of course, is showcase the data or parts of the data. So we conducted quick scans. So we most of the time did that manually and gather the relevant information about how many Infostealer infections could we find, what URLs of sessions could we indicate that showcase that it's actual internal access, types of operating systems. So showcasing that it's different devices that are actually infected, and types of Infostealers, showcasing that's not one event, but you see a Redline Infostealer and a Luma Infostealer, for example. Basically, that evolved right now to an online tool that we have, an OSINT tool. So you can scan your own organization or any other domain. Of course, limited on the level of detail, but it showcases, is there Infostealer activity on this particular domain that showcase that it's actual internal access. So that helps us there. But what you're seeing increasingly, and what is the service that we are offering? That's the question you asked. That historical data, that's all nice, right? And can be very relevant. Let me get back to that later. But first of all, the service that we're selling it's all nice that we see that infection from 1 year ago or 2 years ago. But if tomorrow a new infection gets offered up on the Infostealer marketplace, you should know about it. And that's our service, right? So we continue our infiltration. And if we see a session popping up there that relates to your organization, we report the relevant details about that device, about the malware infection, and about the stolen sessions and cookies to you so you can get into action. That's the base of our service.
So more preventative, I would say then.
Yeah, so this is a good question. It's between detective and preventive. It's basically not after the bang, because it's now offered up for sale. And hopefully you can get into action fast enough before it escalates into a much wider breach. And yes, it's also preventive in the sense that you can prevent that escalation, but detective as well as something's already going wrong there, right? You don't want that popping up. So I think it's in between there. It's hard to actually pinpoint where the measure lies in that sense, or maybe it covers both aspects. The second thing I wanted to mention is about that historical data, because sometimes I get the refute basically that people say, luckily it's just all data, right? The last infection was in 2023. And then I want to point people to the managed data. The managed data breach. I want to point people to the Snowflake data breach. And the interesting thing about the Snowflake data breach, and people can Google it, and they should specifically Google the managed investigation into the Snowflake data breach. What happened here? If you Google it on Wikipedia, you will find that it's according to Wikipedia, but that's peer-reviewed, so I'm allowed to say that. It's one of the biggest data breaches of this decade, so that's big, right? And what happened here is basically a criminal group, they crawled those Infostealer marketplaces searching for logins on Snowflake. So that's a software provider and looking for customer instances. So this wasn't a breach at Snowflake, but it was customers who were logging into Snowflake, and Snowflake got and access to the Snowflake systems got compromised. But the thing here is, and that is showcased in the managed investigation, that most of the credentials that were abused, that they were quite old, some of them even 4 years old, right? In cyber, this is very old. And that shows, first of all, how valuable that access is. But second of all, it shows what big of a blind spot this is. Because if you then don't remediate it, it can still be active after 4 years' time and still bite you. Come back to bite you. So it's good to take action on it.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, because that's what you also said. Most companies, when there is a breach or data is compromised, that they are not aware of this. And this can go on for 1-2 years, sometimes even longer in this case. And Snowflake is one of the biggest tech companies. So you would expect that they would have figured this out or would be more alert to it.
So basically, that's one additional proposition for us that service this year is that we are right now working together with AVAS, the biggest ERP provider of the Netherlands. 1 million people log into it daily, so that's quite something what's happening there. And they want to prevent a Snowflake situation of happening to their clients. And although in this particular case, just like with Snowflake, criminals didn't give away, Snowflake didn't have a breach, but it was customers giving away basically access to their systems unknowingly to criminals. It still is a breach related to Snowflake, and data from the Snowflake systems was stolen. So it's your responsibility, right? So what did we do with AVAS is integrate with them. So if we see a login on AVAS popping up on the Infostealer marketplaces, so they can get into action to pull that session preventively. There it works really preventively. This won't happen to them. And I think this is also for software providers an additional responsibility that they should consider to make sure that people continue to keep trust into their systems and that the data on their systems stays safe, even though the problem doesn't lie directly with them, basically.
And I want to switch gears a little bit because now you're also in a super interesting time because you raised a significant investment also from some of the people that have been here on the show as well, and also in investor fund. So to really scale operations, and I think what you've also done very smart is to have this European labeling that you do, like the dark web monitoring and the whole service around it, but very European based. I think that's very clever. I think that's maybe also why the investors bought into the story as well. But what's happening now? There's all of a sudden a chunk of money on the bank account, and you need to scale, you need to show growth, you need to increase revenue, you need new logos. It's become super serious all of a sudden. How did this affect your life and happiness, and how do you cope with it?
So I'm really, really lucky to have those investors on board. And the reason why I wanted to do this specific round is looking at my own background, right? I already said, and that's also true for my co-founder, Sano, he's a cybersecurity expert, but he doesn't have deep roots in the industry. And I wanted to have, first of all, to have people on board who have those deep roots, who basically grasp that market much more than I do. And of course, I work really hard, right, to deeper understand the market. And I know much more about it than 1 year ago, and much more than 3 years ago, but I'm still learning. And basically, I wanted to get a deeper knowledge about it through those investors. Secondly, both Sano and I are first-time founders. And I think, and that relates to the question that you're asking, having experience on board of people who have previously scaled organizations, scaled startups in the cybersecurity industry, I think that's really important.
Scaled and sold is
also yes, and I think that's so important and valuable to us, because basically I have these guys who are on board with us, and that helps me navigate those strategic challenges. And as you might know, in a startup, it changes quite often what the strategic objective really is, because you learn more and you understand more where you really click. Because what we're seeing increasingly for us is that what I first saw as a threat is probably the biggest opportunity for us out there. Let me explain that a bit. In January, I was speaking to Rogier Fischer, the CEO of Hadrian.
Yeah, he's also been here on the show. Yeah,
also been here on the show, and he just said, basically, he didn't focus all too much on it. Well, we're also going to integrate dark web data in our solution. And I was just there on a friendly conversation, not pitching anything. I was like, oh, did you already think about us? And he was like, oh, yeah, okay, we could include you guys in the proof of value. And first of all, I saw this as a massive threat, because Hadrian also serving some of the clients that we were serving. And secondly, I thought, well, what if other solutions are also going to do this? But thinking about this for a longer period of time, I thought, this is it, right? Because some of the problems that I have right now selling my data to end clients are solved by this, and I bring more value. Let me explain that a bit. Is that I'm a data company. I don't sell a service. Yeah, basically a service to stay up to date with your data, but I don't sell a solution. I also sell maybe part of the problem, right? You have to do something with it. But what if I can basically integrate with cybersecurity companies, with MSSPs, with MSPs with a cybersecurity portfolio, with platforms like Hadrian, and integrate my data in there? It's part of a solution. And they can work on that data, right? So they can, for example, test our data. They can use it in incident response instances. They can make sure that action is taken at the client side in case of an MSP, to make sure that those sessions are basically revoked before they can be abused. And that's all stuff that I can do myself. So I think here is the combination. At first I thought, oh, this is not going to help the way I approach the market. And I was right about it. It's not going to help the way I previously approached the market. But for now, as I said, it's our biggest opportunity. And moving back to your question, so to the investment route, how are you going to use it? For us, we are using it basically for this pivot to our new ideal customer, to make sure that we have excellent APIs. And we already did a great step there in the past few months, that we can provide to our customers in that set, so we can integrate with them, and they can basically integrate our solution in their offering. So that's a big part of the story. And of course, I was so proud that we really did very well in that proof of value with Hadrian. So they were onboarded as a customer in April, and then later on I had the opportunity to work together with Rogier as an investor, which I'm of course really proud of as well. So then you never know how a year is going to be. I really didn't schedule it to be that way, to schedule 2025 to be that way in December 2024, but it turned out this way, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, that brings me maybe to the next questions. Also, you cannot really look ahead too much into the future. Of course, you set goals, but now that the investment round is here and you're looking to scale, I think you're finding your ICP, so you know who to partner with, who to sell to. A team is, of course, also a very important part of every company. I think now when the client traffic is picking up quickly, as I understood, what's going to happen with the team? And for all the professionals listening now, what would make it a cool opportunity to connect with you?
So first of all, we had a huge expansion of our team in the past year, although headcount stayed the same, and that's all thanks to AI. And
Nice.
I should emphasize it because it really, for us, it made an enormous difference for the pace at which we can work. For example, we already use quite a lot of AI for the dark web exploration, but for building our platform, for being able to provide a partner portal to service our API clients. It was so important for us to do that already. So we were already able to scale our team without actually adding headcount. So I think that's great. Looking forward, and it's also where our strategic objectives lie. First of all, I would love to focus more on that dark web exploration part and see what other gems are out there that we don't know about yet, that we can find and basically bring that value back to customers. So I think that's one part, but I think the really important part here is I think we found our ideal customer. I think we can move forward on this and then move it abroad, right? I'm quite convinced that with the current way we're approaching this, we can be an enormous factor in the Dutch market, and we're seeing quite a lot of traction there already. But why stay limited to the Dutch market? And I think internationalization is the next objective there, moving to a country like Germany. But I can do that on my own, right? So there you need people who actually have access to that market and help you open that up for a solution like ours. And already in October, we were at the ITSA. So we had a booth there, the cybersecurity conference in Nuremberg. And it was really amazing for me to see that people actually came to my booth because they said, well, I looked you up in the directory of companies. So they're good for the listeners to know. There are like 2,000-3,000 vendors over there. So that's an enormous amount of vendors. They said, but you are a European dark web monitoring solution and I want that. And the crazy thing is, what you see happening for us right now is that we're moving back to dark web, right? So I started with dark web monitoring for end clients. Then I moved to Infostealer monitoring for end clients. But what you see right now is with our new target audience, the dark web in itself, that's the category name. So they want to find me on that as well. And then I have to be available on all fronts. And still Infostealers, they are the main chunk that drives value. But you see also that the other data streams are picking up again in relevance. Oh, wow. So we're going full circle.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Going into it, as I said, I was looking forward to understand more about dark web. And for me, to be honest, the term Infostealers was also new. So I'm extremely happy how you explained it and also what you guys are trying to solve. And that brings me to the last question, sadly already. And that's if you can send one signal message to all the CISOs across the world, what would this message be?
So looking at that question, if I look back at what was most important for us as a startup to get where we are right now, is that we had the initial support of 2 CISOs who basically thought, well, it's a diamond in the rough. But yes, I want to work with you to make sure you get somewhere else. And they knew that at the first time we started with our MVP, that it wasn't pitch perfect, but they saw some initial value and they wanted to help us get somewhere. So if I would send one signal message, because I think this is so important for startups, for innovation, it's adopt one startup, onboard them as a vendor, right? Pay them real money and then guide them forward. Because I think there's so little to lose from giving a startup in a, of course, secure environment, stuff like that, an opportunity. But there's so much to gain for society as a whole if you give these startups a challenge to prove their value. So that will be my message to them.
Great. I'm fully with you. I'm fully on board. I think it's very important. That's also one of the reasons for this podcast, that the ecosystem and the startups, they get a chance. So
so thanks for that chance.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Stay safe, stay curious, and until next time in the district.